LSU in year 2 under Brian Kelly, I believe, is good enough to beat anybody they play. Now, being good enough to do it and actually doing it are not always the same thing. But up today, I'm going to give you a 2023 college football preview and game-by-game prediction for the LSU Tigers. Oh, yeah, good morning, and that is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you, and thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post these videos every single day of the year. We're right in the middle of our 2023 game-by-game prediction videos. I've done a series of these already, 3 or 4, I think. We're going to do about 40 or 50 of them between now and the start of the season, so make sure you subscribe now. Share these videos out. Help grow the channel in the off season. I really, really appreciate it. I'll put a playlist up here that's got the teams I've done already. Feel free to click that playlist, click back on the videos to whatever teams might interest you. But we are going to do LSU today. Let's get started. All right, shout out to JC over on the Patreon page. He wanted to see this LSU preview and game-by-game prediction. JC, thank you for supporting the channel over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. I can't tell you how much it means. The Patreon page really helps me keep my head above water on this channel, especially in the off season. So big shout out to all of you who are choosing to support the channel over there on the Patreon page. If you are a member of the Uncle Lou Patreon page, make sure you head over there soon. You'll see a post on the top of the page about these prediction videos. I need you to leave a comment and let me know what team it is you want to see me do a preview and prediction for. Every day when I sit down to do these videos, that's where I go. I head over to the Patreon page. I scroll through the list of comments that you guys have made over there. I pick out a team, and I do the prediction and the preview video. If you're not on the Uncle Lou Patreon page, first of all, what are you doing? I don't know what's wrong with you. There's a link in the description of this video. Click that link. It'll take you over to the Uncle Lou Patreon page. You can have yourself a look around. If you decide you want to join up and help support the channel, I would really appreciate it. It'll make you smarter, and it'll lower your cholesterol, which will get you off that Lipitor, which is killing you from the inside out. So it's really a win-win all the way around. But JC, this one's for you, buddy. All right, here we go. LSU. Now, they're definitely not going to sneak up on anybody this year. Maybe they snuck up on a few people last year. Last year, of course, was Brian Kelly's first year as head coach at LSU after spending over a decade at Notre Dame, where he consistently won 10-plus games, but was never really able to get over the hump in the postseason, kind of notoriously winless in major postseason games. Brian Kelly was at Notre Dame. Lost a BCS title game back in 2012, lost a couple of playoff games, lost multiple New Year's Six bowl games, but a consistently good team. He makes his way down to Baton Rouge, and in his first year there, knocks off Alabama, wins the SEC West, ends up playing Purdue and I think the Citrus Bowl or something like that, and did get a win. Fell short in the SEC title game to Georgia, but still a productive first year for Brian Kelly at LSU, especially if you consider how bad LSU was the 2 years before he got there. Now, everybody talks about that 2019 LSU team, and it was one of the greatest teams of my lifetime. There's no question about it. Definitely one of the best offensively with Joe Burrow and all those NFL wide receivers. But you have to remember, they fell off a cliff after that. 2020 and 2021 were not good, to say the least, for LSU. Cost Ed Orgeron his job. Brian Kelly came in with really not a lot of expectations in year one and exceeded all of those expectations, like we mentioned, knocking off Alabama and winning the SEC West in his first year at LSU. So looking to build on that in year two, trying to take it a step further, trying maybe to win the SEC. And is LSU a potential playoff team in 2023? I think they are a potential playoff team. I mean, I think if you made a list of 6, 7, 8 teams that you think have a chance to make that 4-team college football playoff at the end of the regular season, I think any fair-minded person would have LSU in that list of 7 or 8 teams. Maybe not everybody thinks they are a playoff team. Maybe some people think they are a playoff team, but I think if you're going to make a list of say 10 teams, you'd have to have LSU on that list as at least a potential player for the playoffs at the end of the season in 2023. They went 9-3 last year in the regular season with a win over Alabama, like I mentioned. They did lose to Florida State, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. The Florida State loss ended up being not necessarily a bad loss, as Florida State ended up being a pretty good team last year, too. They also finished at 9-3. Weird ending to that game. That was a sloppy... I talked a lot about the Florida State-LSU game yesterday, but sloppy game, special teams blunders, one of which cost LSU the game. And then there was the Tennessee game, which really was over in the first 5 minutes. I'm not sure what happened there with LSU. It was a home game for LSU. I know it was a day game. It was played at noon East Coast time, 11 a.m. local time in LSU, but LSU just didn't show up for that game for whatever reason. They again, special teams miscues early in that game. Tennessee jumped out to a 2 or 3 score lead there in the first quarter, and it was really over at that point. As good as LSU was last year, they weren't going to come back from 2 or 3 scores down against Tennessee, and Tennessee just ran away with that game. And then the one that really, I think, bothers a lot of people from last year is that Texas A&M lost at the end of the season. By the end of the season, we knew LSU was a pretty good team, right? Yes, they lost to Florida State. And yes, they lost to Tennessee, but both of those teams were very highly ranked, especially once you got further along in the season. The loss to Florida State started to look better and better, and Tennessee was top 5 for a lot of the year, top 10 for the majority of the year. But then the Texas A&M game happened, and Texas A&M was just a terrible team last year. I mean, you can make the argument Texas A&M was the worst team in the SEC last year, worse than Vandy, worse than whoever you want to name. And LSU losing that game at the end of the regular season is really inexcusable. LSU was a much better team last year. They were better coached. They had better talent. They had a way better quarterback. There's just no excuse for that loss, really, for LSU to Texas A&M. That's the one, really, I think, that stings when you look back on it as an LSU fan. Again, you want to win every game. You were close in that Florida State game, so, that one stuck with you for a little while. The Tennessee game was what it was. That game wasn't close. Like I said, it was over in the first 5 minutes. Tennessee was a pretty good team. You kind of just write that off and move on. But that Texas A&M game's got to stick in your craw. That was just a terrible loss. They followed that up the following week with a loss to Georgia in the SEC championship game, another game that just was never really close. Georgia was up to that 30 or 35-point lead, whatever it was at halftime. LSU did score a lot of points in the second half, but still ended up losing by 20, by 3 scores. That was 50 to 30, I believe the final score of that SEC title game was, and they went on to just completely steamroll a terrible Purdue team. A terrible Purdue team in that Citrus Bowl and finished 10-4. So some good, some bad, but overall a really good season for LSU in Brian Kelly's first year there. And like I said, exceeded everyone's expectations heading into the season in terms of what people thought LSU was going to be in 2022. So lots of reason for optimism, lots of reasons to be excited heading into 2023. And we're going to talk about some of those things now. We're going to talk about the offense, then the defense, then I'll put the schedule up on the screen and we'll go through it game by game. All right. Let's look at some numbers here for LSU real quick. My ranking for LSU heading into the preseason, I guess we're in the offseason now. I do 3 offseason rankings. I do one after signing day in February. I then update it after the spring games are played at the end of April. That's the ranking I have now. And then I do one final preseason ranking around the first week of August. So I'll update my rankings one more time before the start of the season. But right now, I've got LSU ranked 3rd in my preseason top 25. So I'm really high on LSU, and we're going to get into some of the reasons why when we start talking about the offense and the defense, but I've got them ranked 3rd. Where are they ranked nationally? Sort of a mixed bag with LSU. Most of the polls I looked at this morning when I sat down to take notes for this video, and I looked at probably 5 or 6, 7 different polls or rankings from all the main sports blogs and websites out there. Most of the rankings I see for LSU have them somewhere between 4 and 9 in that range there. I, of course, have them at 3. There's a couple of other rankings where you can find them in the top 3. The lowest I saw them ranked was 14. I believe that was Fox Sports ranking, had LSU at 14. I don't know how they justify that, but they had LSU at 14. So, but the general range seemed to be about 4 through 9. Total wins. What does Vegas think in terms of a win total for LSU in 2023? Now, this is regular season wins, a 12-game regular season, right? This doesn't take postseason or conference championship games or anything like that into account. It's a win total based on a 12-game regular season. They have the win total at 9.5 for LSU. Now, that's an indication of what the betting public feels about LSU. That's all that means. People are betting money on how many games they think LSU will win, and Vegas is moving the win total up and down based on how those bets come in. And right now, the win total for LSU is at 9.5. Yes, I know LSU can't win 9.5 games. Nobody can win 9.5 games. This is a betting number. So if you think LSU is going to win 10 or more games, you bet over 9.5. If you think LSU is going to win 9 or less games, you bet under 9.5. That's what the number means, and that's literally all it means. Heisman odds. Any Heisman contenders for LSU in 2023? Well, quarterback Jaden Daniels, right? He's currently 7th in the odds at about plus 1,500, depending on which sports book you look at. He's right there with quarterbacks like Sam Hartman at Notre Dame and Quinn Ewers at Texas. So, you got your front runners like Caleb Williams. You got kind of your long shot guys like Marvin Harrison, wide receiver from Ohio State, or guys like that. Jaden Daniels, 6th, 7th, depending on which particular sports book you look at, odds plus 1,500. National title odds for LSU. Is LSU a national title contending team? LSU has kind of famously won a national title with each of their last 3 coaches. I have never really researched this, but I don't know that there's ever been a team that has done that. Won a national title with 3 consecutive coaches in a row like that. But LSU has pulled it off. Saban in the early 2000s, Les Miles in the late 2000s, and of course Ed Orgeron in 2019. So the last 3 coaches they've had have all won national titles. Can Brian Kelly become the 4th LSU head coach in a row to win a national title? I don't know. Can he do it in 2023? Well, according to the Vegas odds, LSU has the 6th best chance in America of winning a national title in 2023. The odds are plus 1,600. Right ahead of them in 5th place, Southern Cal. Right behind them in 7th place, Florida State, who, of course, they play in week 1, and we'll talk about that game in a minute. But there's some numbers of what some people are thinking about LSU in June, still a couple of months out from the 2023 season. All right, let's talk about LSU's offense. Of course, it starts with quarterback Jaden Daniels, who had a good year last year. I mean, I remember watching LSU last year and liking what I saw from Jaden Daniels, but not being overly impressed with his ability to throw the ball. Not that he's a terrible passer. He's not, he's nowhere near as bad as, like, say, Anthony Richardson was last year at throwing the ball or anything like that. But I just remember saying that out loud a bunch of times. Jaden Daniels is good, but I'd like to see him throw the ball a little bit better. We'll see if he can improve on that a little bit this year. Again, he wasn't terrible last year, just, maybe you hope it gets a little bit better. But he comes back 3,800 total yards last year. That includes passing and rushing. But you have to remember, he was LSU's leading rusher, something else we'll talk about in a second. So about 800 of those yards were rushing yards, and he had 29 total touchdowns. Don't forget they have backup Garrett Nussmeier. This is important because Jaden Daniels does run around a lot, right? He was their leading rusher last year. And what's your fear or your worry when you have a quarterback that runs around a lot? Especially one that's built like Jaden Daniels. Again, not that he's tiny, but he's not Cam Newton or even Anthony Richardson or KJ Jefferson from Arkansas. He's not built like that. He's not one of these guys that's 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 240 pounds. It's dangerous for Jaden Daniels to be running around a lot in the SEC, so you need a good backup. Well, Garrett Nussmeier is a good backup with potential to be great. In fact, there are some people who think Garrett Nussmeier should be the starting quarterback for LSU. He, of course, came into the game against Georgia in the SEC championship last year at halftime after Jaden Daniels got injured and just lit up the Georgia secondary in the second half. I mean, it was embarrassing as a Georgia fan, honestly, to watch what Garrett Nussmeier did to the Georgia defense in the second half of that game. Now, Georgia was up by 30 points by the time Nussmeier got in, so you've got some of the people that will say, well, Georgia was kind of just in a prevent shell thing. They were up by so much, and there's probably some truth to that, but I'm telling you, as a Georgia fan, I watched the game, and there was more to it than just that. Garrett Nussmeier looked really, really good in the second half of that game. So if something happens to Jaden Daniels, LSU's got one of the best backup situations in all of America with Garrett Nussmeier. 8 starters returned from that offense last year. This is the primary reason why people who are high on LSU are high on LSU. 8 starters returned on an offense that put up a lot of points last year and looked dynamic at times with Jaden Daniels. With Jaden Daniels at quarterback. All 5 of the offensive linemen are back. This is great news for Jaden Daniels, right? You got to try to keep him upright. Returning all 5 of the offensive linemen is a step in the right direction there. One of the best young tight ends in the country, tight end Mason Taylor. Is it Mason Taylor? I think it's Mason Taylor. If I'm getting that name wrong, I apologize. I make a bunch of notes, but then sometimes I can hardly read them, but I believe it's Mason Taylor. And then, of course, wide receivers. They do lose Keyshawn Boutte, which is a big loss. He was a great wide receiver. He's off to the NFL. But the rest of their wide receivers return. And what have you known about LSU year after year after year for as long as you can remember? They're going to have a couple of really good wide receivers. You don't have to worry about LSU when it comes to the wide receiver position. Malik Neighbors is back. Brian Thomas is back. They're just loaded at the wide receiver position again, even with the departure of Keyshawn Boutte. Running back is where they've got to get better at LSU. in my opinion, if I was an LSU fan, I would not want Jaden Daniels being our leading rusher for the second year in a row. I would want a running back to sort of step up and take on at least half the load that Jaden Daniels took on last year. For one thing, I think it just makes for a better overall offense, a more rounded offense, when opposing defenses have to respect not only the quarterback's ability to run the ball, but a running back's ability to run the ball. And last year, really, there just wasn't a running back that LSU had that really you just didn't have to worry about any of the LSU running backs. They just weren't great. Might not be the case this year. They brought Logan Diggs in from Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame, like a lot of teams these days, doesn't really have a starting running back. They've got like a 1A and a 1B. A lot of teams do this now. It saves just to save some mileage, on the running back. But he had almost 1,000 yards rushing last year from Notre Dame, 822 yards, I think it was. Josh Williams is back too. But Josh Williams is LSU's leading returning rusher, not named Jaden Daniels. So Josh Williams last year for LSU had 532 yards. Jaden Daniels had 880 yards. So almost 400 more yards the quarterback had rushing last year than LSU's leading running back. Seems to me LSU is going to be better off if one or both of these running backs can sort of carry the load and take some off the plate of Jaden Daniels. We'll see. I really like the addition of Logan Diggs. I think he's going to be really, really good behind this offensive line. The combination, when the zone reads, right, where, quarterback gets the ball in a shotgun, maybe he's going to hand it to the running back, maybe he's going to snatch it away from the running back and take off around the outside. When you have both a quarterback that can beat you with his legs and running backs that the opposing defense has to respect, that's dangerous. And that's what LSU could have this year with Logan Diggs at running back and Jaden Daniels at quarterback. Again, I'd like to see him throw the ball a little better at times, and obviously he needs to stay healthy. But LSU's offense is going to be really, really good in 2023. Over on the defensive side of the ball, two names that just jump out right away. If you don't know these two names, you probably know one of them at least for sure. These are two of the best defensive players in America. You remember last year, all offseason, everybody talked about Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. Will Anderson and Dallas Turner at Alabama, right? People should be talking about these two people this year. Harold Perkins and Mason Smith. Harold Perkins might have been the best linebacker in the country last year. He was the best linebacker in the country last year at times, at certain weeks, the way he played. There were weeks where no defensive player in the country played better than Harold Perkins. And he was a true freshman last year at linebacker. Then you got Mason Smith along the defensive line. Now, he tore his knee opening week last year against Florida State and was out the rest of the year. But he comes back. He's a potential All-American. He's a potential first-round draft pick when the time comes for him to enter the draft. He's an absolute beast along the defensive line. Now, when he got hurt, they put in what was the other guy's name? Wingo. When Mason Smith got hurt, they put Wingo in. Nobody knew who the hell he was. All he did was go on to become an All-American. So now Mason Smith comes back. Wingo's still there. You've got two All-American defensive tackles. And behind that, you've got maybe the best linebacker in the country at Harold Perkins. But you need to know Harold Perkins' name and Mason Smith's name if for some reason you don't. They're going to be absolute animals on this LSU defense last year. Harold Perkins last year as a true freshman, 72 tackles, 7.5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. Just an absolute beast, like I said. Greg Penn III is also back. He's LSU's leading returning tackler. Really, really good. But he might not even start in 2023. LSU went out to the portal and brought in that guy from Oregon State. I know I wrote his name down, Omar Spates. They brought Omar Spates in from Oregon State, and if spring is any indication, as good as Greg Penn was last year, he might lose his starting job to this guy. Now, I'm sure they'll find a way to play both of them, whether it's a rotating thing or even ways to get them both on the field at the same time. But those are two more dynamic players defensively for LSU. They're going to be really, really good in the front seven. My concern about LSU, whether you're talking offense, defense, whatever, if you ask me to pick out one position group that concerns me about LSU in 2023, it's going to be the secondary. And this is kind of weird to talk about because LSU has been known as kind of DBU over the last decade or so. They've put a lot of great safeties, corners, the defensive backs into the NFL draft, several, all SEC guys, all American guys. I mean, just some household names have come through LSU's defensive back room over the last 10 years or so. And right now is probably the most depleted that secondary has been in a long, long time. Now, they did raid the portal. and they brought some guys in, and a lot of those guys are going to end up starting and getting significant playing time. Denver Harris from Texas A&M, probably going to start. Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse, probably going to start. J.K. Johnson from Ohio State. If he doesn't start, he's a potential nickel guy or a rotation guy at corner. Zaya Alexander from Southeast Louisiana. Again, a rotation guy, potential nickel or dime guy. These are all players that are going to start or have significant playing time, and all came from the portal to LSU in the offseason. Now, you do return some people at safety. Greg Brooks, Major Burns, Sage Ryan, you get them back at safety. They need to play a little bit better, but at least they have the experience up under Brian Kelly and experience playing in this defense now for one full year. But the secondary could be a problem and a concern for LSU, especially when they play teams that have really good quarterbacks that like to sling the ball around. For example, Florida State and Jordan Travis. But anyway, that's a brief overview of the offense and the defense. Let's put the schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game. I'm going to try to give you a winner and a loser for every single game on LSU's schedule. All right, here we go. Now, for the second year in a row, LSU opens up with Florida State. This was a week 1 game last year. It's a week 1 game again this year. Now, last year, Florida State played a week 0 game, which was a big benefit for them. It's like having a preseason game. LSU didn't have one. Florida State did. Florida State ended up winning a close game last year in New Orleans. Now, I did the Florida State version of this video yesterday. So if you've seen that video, first of all, you already know who I'm picking in this game between LSU and Florida State. But I'm also not going to repeat over the next 10 minutes everything I said yesterday when I talked about the LSU-Florida State game. If you want a more detailed breakdown of what I think about this game in particular, click back to yesterday's video, fast forward the Florida State video to the LSU game, and you can hear some more of my thoughts on it. But I think this is going to be a great game. I think these are 2 legitimate top 10 teams, possibly top 5 teams when it's all said and done at the end of the year. No outcome in this game would surprise me. I would not be at all shocked to see Florida State win. I would not be at all shocked to see LSU win. I think these are 2 really, really good teams. And I'm glad to see this game get the hype in the offseason that it deserves, because last year it didn't. Florida State had been in the toilet for a while. Same with LSU, plus a new coaching staff. I feel like nobody talked about this game last offseason. It ended up being a great game in terms of it was close and it came down to the end. It was a sloppy game. I don't think we'll see that this year. I think both these teams are going to show up this year ready to play. I think this is probably the game I'm looking forward to the most of the big non-con games this year. And we got some big ones. I mean, you're talking Texas, Bama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. The list goes on and on. This is probably the game I'm looking forward to the most. And this is one of the hardest games I've had to pick. I went back and forth on it a bunch of times. Like I said, if you saw yesterday's video, you already know. But I do pick LSU to win this game. I think LSU starts out 1-0 with a close win in Orlando against Florida State. And again, you can click back to yesterday's video if you want to hear me talk more about that game in particular. I just don't want to reiterate again today everything I said yesterday about that game. So LSU's 1-0. They move on to week 2 at home game, home opener, Grambling State. This will be an easy win for LSU. This will be a backup and walk-ons type of game, right? You have to, plenty of people get a chance to play in the second half of this one. LSU will win big. Then you have your first conference game of the year on the road at Mississippi State. Now, Will Rogers comes back to Mississippi State, and he might be the most underrated quarterback in the country. He played up under Mike Leach the last couple of years, so I feel like the quarterback doesn't get any credit when you play for Mike Leach, because no matter how good you are, they give Mike Leach the credit. Will Rogers is a good quarterback. He's back. Unfortunately, Mike Leach isn't. Passed away at the end of last season. A tragic situation. Caught us all by surprise. A kind of a out of the blue type of deal. A sad situation, not just for the people of Mississippi State, but for all of college football. Mike Leach, one of those guys whose personality is kind of bigger than even the world of college football. And we all hated to see him go. But the reality is, in terms of football, that's a big blow for Mississippi State. They promoted their defensive coordinator, Zach Arnett, the head coach, and he has a totally different mindset and philosophy in terms of what he wants to do from a game plan perspective at Mississippi State. Wants to be more of a balanced team, more focused on running the ball, whereas Leach was throwing it 60 times a game. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm not even saying that won't eventually work. But I do think it's going to be hard to take a team that's used to dropping back and throwing it 60 times a season and sort of transitioning that into a run-first sort of line of scrimmage team in 1 year. I think Mississippi State is going to be in for some struggles in 2023, starting with this game. I think LSU wins on the road. Not enough cowbell at Mississippi State. LSU is 3-0. And then you come back home to take on Arkansas. Arkansas disappointing last year after being pretty good the year before. KJ Jefferson returns at quarterback, which is huge for Arkansas. He's a big guy, hard to get down, doesn't mind taking off running. And look, he'll run between the tackles too. He reminds me a lot of Cam Newton. No, he does not have the talent of a Cam Newton. I just mean his play style. From his size to his arm strength to his ability to run, he's got speed and power. He'll run over you. Like I said, he doesn't mind running between the tackles. He's not just an edge guy when he gets loose. But Arkansas just lacks threats on the outside, in my opinion. Defensively, I'm not sure they can hold up against some of the better half or teams in the better half of the SEC. And I think LSU, from a talent standpoint, just overwhelms Arkansas. Tough place to play there in LSU. I think Arkansas gets to win, or I'm sorry, LSU gets to win. They're on a roll, 4-0. Now the schedule starts to get a little trickier. Back-to-back road games at Ole Miss and at Mizzou. Now, Mizzou's not a great team. But they're getting better. They're around 500 the last few years with Drinkwitz. Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. Tale of two halves of the season last year for them. They started out 5-0, 6-0, 7-0, whatever it was, ranked in the top 10, and then they lost like 4 of their last 5 games or something to end the season. Lane Kiffin yet to really get a signature win in my mind. I'll ask y'all, what is Lane Kiffin's best win? When people ask me that, I shake my head. I don't know. I don't know that he's ever had a big win. He might be one of the most overrated coaches in college football, if we're being honest. But they return a bunch of talent. They've got just a ridiculous amount of talent at the quarterback position. Jackson Dart returns. He was there last year. They then brought in Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma State. Regardless of what you think about him, he's got a ton of experience. He started for 3 or 4 years there. Had some good seasons at Oklahoma State. Last year was not one of them. He got out, transfer portal, winded up at LSU. And then, of course, they bring in Walker Howard, who was, you know who that is if you're an LSU man. He was a freshman last year, 3rd string behind Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. He decided to transfer out after 1 year there. Landed at Ole Miss. So LSU, kind of a 3-quarterback situation in the offseason. Now, I think Spencer Sanders is going to end up being the quarterback that starts there. Whoever it is, though, is going to have maybe the best running back in the SEC to hand the ball off to, and that's Quentin Judkins. Absolutely unbelievable last year as a true freshman. Now, I'm curious to see how he does this year without Zach Evans. Talked a little bit about this earlier, but a lot of your teams now are using like a 1A, 1B approach when it comes to the running back situation. And Ole Miss was deadly last year with the combination of Zach Evans and Quentin Judkins. With Zach Evans gone off to the NFL, Quentin Judkins is going to get a lot of the defense's attention in every Ole Miss game this season. We'll see how he does there. They're going to have to play better defensively as well if they want to win some of their bigger games. LSU is better than Ole Miss. There's not a question in my mind. But I just have a funny feeling about this game. This is part of the part of the video, I guess, where the LSU fans are going to stop loving me and start hating me. I think Ole Miss actually wins this game. I think Ole Miss beats LSU at home for what I think will probably be Lane Kiffin's biggest win of his career. I think LSU will be a definite top 5 team at this point after knocking off Florida State in week 1. And I think Lane Kiffin at home gets the biggest win of his career. You're 4-1. At Mizzou, this is another dangerous game, I think. Mizzou is better than people give them credit for. If you look at last year, they were 6-6. It seems like they're 6-6 every year under Drinkwitz. Most of their losses were by 1 touchdown or less. I don't think LSU is losing 2 games in a row. I think they're too good. I think Brian Kelly is too good of a coach to let one loss cause a second loss. I don't see that happening here, even though it is always tricky to play back-to-back road games. I think LSU rebounds, goes on the road, and gets a win at Mizzou. Come back home and play Auburn. Auburn's going to be a much better team than they were last year. I'm convinced of that. I still have questions about them at the quarterback position, and I've got a lot of questions about them in terms of depth. They've done well in the transfer portal. Brian Harsin, though, was not a great recruiter, so they didn't have a lot of quality depth to start with. So I'm worried about their depth. I'm worried about the quarterback situation. Hugh Freeze, obviously a huge upgrade in terms of coaching ability over Brian Harsin, and I do think Auburn will win more games, 2, 3, 4 more games this year than they did last year. This won't be one of them. I think LSU is just too talented. Again, it's at home for LSU. I can't see them losing. I think LSU gets the win. They beat Auburn. And then you have another non-con game against Army. Again, you're so much better than Army, you can't even begin to compare it. But Army can be a tricky team to play. They run a triple option. Nobody likes to have to deal with that. You get it before your bye week. It's hard to get your team excited about the prospect of playing Army. It's hard to prepare your team to play Army in 1 week because of the offense they run with the triple option. We see Army either upset a team like LSU every year or come really close to doing it. Could this be the one this year? I don't think so. I think LSU gets the job done against Army. You go into your bye week with just the one loss on the road at Ole Miss. And then probably the game of the year in the SEC West. Most people assume the SEC is coming down to 2 games this year. This game between LSU and Bama, and then the Georgia-Tennessee game later in November. You beat Alabama last year at home in a great game, a signature win for Brian Kelly in year 1, propelled you on to the SEC West title, and LSU's looking to do it again. Alabama looking to rebound from this loss from last year. And here's my issue with Alabama. Nick Saban's the greatest coach of all time. We all know that. Never underestimate him. Never count him out. They've got the most talented roster in all of college football. We get it. They do every year. They had the most talented roster last year when they lost to LSU. There are too many questions about Alabama for me to pick them to win this game. That doesn't mean they can't win it. They may win it. And it may be that by the time this game is played during the season, and I'm doing sort of my weekly picks on games, that I pick Alabama. I don't know, but obviously Alabama is talented enough to beat anybody. There are too many questions about Alabama for me to pick them to win this game. LSU is legitimately talented. They are a legitimate threat, not only to beat Alabama, but to win the West, to win the SEC, to make the college football playoff, and who knows from there. And when I look at Alabama, I see 3 quarterbacks who would not get on the field at LSU if they were there. I see 3 wide receivers who would not get on the field at LSU if they were there. You talk to Alabama fans, and they're all hanging their hat on an offensive line and a true freshman running back. Look, Alabama's going to have a good offensive line, and I think Justice Haynes at running back will be good, but the reality is he is a true freshman, and he's not Derrick Henry. I know Alabama's plan is to turn the clock back to 2015 and to push people around for 4 quarters and beat them 24-10. I get that. I just don't know that they can do that against LSU. I really don't. You look at LSU's defensive line, if there's a front 7 in the SEC, Georgia and LSU are probably the 2 that are built to stop an Alabama-style rushing attack if that's what they decide to do this year. Defensively, I do think Alabama will be good. I think LSU will struggle to move the ball on them. It's obviously a tough environment to play on the road in Bryant-Denny. Jaden Daniels going to have a hell of a game. It's just hard for me to find any advantage that Alabama would have over LSU. When I was talking about LSU's defense earlier in the video, and I said if there's something that concerns me, it's their secondary. And, what happens if they play a team with an elite quarterback and some wide receivers that can really spread the field? That's not Alabama. Jalen Milroe is Anthony Richardson in disguise. Ty Simpson, who knows? Nobody knows. Apparently the coaches know, and they're not happy about it. They're so unhappy about it, they went out and got Tyler Buckner. The same Tyler Buckner that lost to Marshall as quarterback of Notre Dame last year while throwing no touchdowns and 2 interceptions before getting hurt and sitting out the rest of the year under offensive coordinator Tommy Rees, who Bama also brought in. Too many question marks. I think LSU beats Bama for the 2nd year in a row, this time on the road in Bryant-Denny Stadium. LSU sitting at just 1 loss. What is this? 8 weeks, 7, 8, 9 weeks into the season. Still sitting at just 1 loss and in control of their own destiny in the SEC West. Florida Gators at home. This would normally be a pretty tough back-to-back set of games here at Alabama and home against Florida. But if you think Alabama's bad, try studying Florida. They're absolutely horrendous. Now, they may be a little bit better defensively this year than they were last year. I like some of the changes they made on the coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. But again, another team with 0 options at quarterback and wide receiver. Maybe Ricky Pearsall, the Florida wide receiver, maybe he would see the field at LSU some in a rotation with some of the LSU wide receivers. Outside of that, again, Not a single quarterback or a single wide receiver on Florida's roster would even be given a helmet at LSU on game day. I don't know what's happened. Recruiting, transfers, what? I don't know. But there's just no offensive talent right now at Florida. I do like Travis Etienne, their running back, and he had a great year last year behind a pretty good offensive line. An offensive line that's gone. They lost 3 or 4 of their starters from last year's offensive line, and they haven't recruited at the level to be able to replace that. They just haven't. Florida's in for another down year. Even in good years, Florida can't beat LSU. They play every year. I think LSU is 8-2 against Florida in the last 10 years, and that includes some pretty good years for Florida. I think LSU beats the Gators at home. You're on a roll, just the one loss. Georgia State at home. Win. You're not losing to Georgia State. I just don't see it happening. Maybe you fall asleep, and it's one of those games that's embarrassing because you only win by 7 or 10 points. I mean, that's always possible against one of these nobodies. I don't see LSU losing this game, though. And then the last game of the season at Texas A&M. Now, I think Texas A&M is going to be way better than they were last year. Infinitely better. Maybe the most improved team in all of college football. And there's a couple of reasons why that is. Number one, as bad as they were last year, talent was not the issue. It was a combination of things, none of which were talent. Now, yeah, they could stand to be a little bit better at the quarterback position, but you look at how they recruit, and I'm not just talking about that one recruiting class that everybody talks about. They've been in the top 10 as far back as you want to look. They've got one of the top 10 rosters in all of college football. No excuse for the record they had last year. They're absolutely horrible. They beat you, but they were absolutely horrible. That's not happening 2 years in a row. I just refuse to believe it. I'm no Jimbo Fisher fan. I think he'd be fired already if it wasn't for that huge buyout. But much like Hugh Freeze, Auburn hiring Hugh Freeze, I do think Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M is going to be a big benefit for them if Jimbo Fisher actually lets him run the offense. And I'll be the first to admit that that's a legitimate question to ask. It's one thing to say you're going to do it. It's one thing to go out and hire him. It's one thing to bring him in. It's one thing to let him hover around at practice. But when that thing gets kicked off this fall and the rubber hits the road and Texas A&M is struggling to move the ball in a game or whatever, is Jimbo going to take the playbook out of Bobby Petrino's hand and just revert back to doing it himself, or is he going to actually let Bobby Petrino run that thing? We'll find out. But I do think Texas A&M is going to be a lot better. Not good enough to beat LSU, though. I think you beat Texas A&M. I think you finished the season 11-1. And look, you can type till you're blue in the face about, they're good enough to beat Bama, but they can't beat Ole Miss. This types of shit happens all the time. I love reading those comments in the comment section, though, because it really lets me know who just started paying attention to college football yesterday, okay? If you beat every team you're supposed to beat and lose to every team you're supposed to lose to, there would be no point in watching the games. There would be no point in making these videos. It would just be complete. The whole point is that doesn't happen, okay? You weren't supposed to beat Alabama last year, but you did somehow. So don't act like a team that's supposed to win can't lose, and don't act like a team that's supposed to lose can't win. You're supposed to lose to Bama this year. I think you beat them. You're supposed to beat Ole Miss. I think you lose to them. Maybe you beat Ole Miss and lose to Bama. You're still 11-1. Now, that would be bad because then you wouldn't win the West. It'd be better for you to lose to Ole Miss and beat Bama. That would be an ideal situation for the corn dog because that way you still win the West. Because I can tell you right now, Ole Miss ain't good enough to win the West. They're not. Lane Kiffin ain't never winning the West. Guy's overrated. Biggest win of his career will be this year when he beats you. But anyway, there you go. 2023 LSU college football season preview and prediction. I've got LSU at 11-1 with a win over Alabama for the second year in a row. I wonder who's going to cry more, the LSU man about me having them losing to Ole Miss or the Alabama man about me having them lose to LSU. I don't know. And really don't care either. Have a great day.